I spent 8 grueling hours saving a beached orca while her pod called from afar. Just when we thought all hope was lost, she went completely still, and my heart stopped. The sun sparkled on the calm waters near Andrew Rocks as I steered my research boat through the gentle waves. I'm Ben, a marine researcher who's spent years out here, listening to the ocean's heartbeat, the sharp cries of seabirds overhead, the soft slap of waves against my boat's hull. It's a rhythm I've come to know like my own pulse. But that morning, something broke through the familiar chorus. A sound I'd never heard before drifted across the water, haunting, deep, and desperate. It tugged at me, pulling my curiosity and my worry all at once. I tilted my head, straining to catch it again. There it was, a low, mournful wail that seemed to vibrate through the air. My instincts kicked in, honed by years of studying marine life. Something was wrong. I adjusted the boat's course, turning the wheel toward the rocky bend ahead. The engine hummed steadily as I scanned the horizon, my heart beating a little faster. The ocean's a vast place, full of secrets, and that sound felt like a call I couldn't ignore. As I rounded the jagged outcrop of Andrew Rocks, I saw her. A young orca, her sleek black body wedged tight between 2 sharp stones, her white patches catching the morning light. My stomach dropped like an anchor. She was trapped, her massive form twisted awkwardly against the unforgiving rocks. Every few moments, she let out one of those gut-wrenching cries that had drawn me here, each one piercing me deeper than the last. I could see faint streaks of blood where the rocks had scraped her skin, dark red against her glistening hide, and her eyes, wide, dark, and brimming with fear, locked onto me as I drifted closer. They weren't just animal eyes, they were alive with intelligence, pleading in a way that made my chest ache. I cut the engine, letting the boat bob gently in the swells. She was bigger than I'd first thought, her dorsal fin towering above the waterline, even as she lay pinned. I'd seen orcas before, of course, graceful giants cutting through the waves with their pods, but never like this. Never so helpless. My mind raced. How long had she been here? How had she gotten stuck? The tide must have dropped overnight, stranding her as the water pulled away. I wondered about her pod. Were they out there, hearing her calls, unable to reach her? I couldn't tackle this alone. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the radio, the cold metal grounding me. "Whale Point, this is Ben," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "We've got a beached orca at Andrew Rocks. She's stuck bad. I need help fast." Liam's voice crackled back first, calm but urgent. "We're on our way, Ben. Hang tight." Noah chimed in next, promising to grab gear and follow. I trusted them. They were good friends and better teammates, always ready to jump in when the ocean threw us a curveball. I switched channels and called the Coast Guard too, knowing we'd need more than just the 3 of us to pull this off. "Beached orca, Andrew Rocks," I repeated. "Young female, trapped between rocks. We're starting now, but we'll need support." While I waited, I kept my boat at a safe distance, the hull rocking gently in the swell. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. Her blowhole puffed quick, shallow breaths, and her sides heaved with the effort. She was young, maybe 9 years old, I guessed, judging by her size and the shape of her fin. Healthy, too, aside from the scrapes and her awful predicament. I leaned over the rail, studying her as the sun climbed higher, painting the water gold. Her skin glistened, slick and rubbery. But I knew it wouldn't stay that way long under the open sky. Orcas need water, not just to swim, but to keep their bodies cool and supported. Without it, she'd overheat, and her own weight could crush her organs. Time wasn't on our side. I grabbed my binoculars, scanning the horizon for any sign of her pod. Faint calls drifted on the breeze, high-pitched whistles and clicks, the language of orcas. They were out there somewhere, maybe miles off, maybe closer. Did they know she was missing? Were they searching for her? She answered them sometimes, her own calls weaker but still clear, like she was trying to tell them she was here. It made my throat tighten. Orcas are family creatures, tight-knit, loyal. If her pod was calling, they hadn't given up on her. Neither would I. The minutes stretched long and heavy, the sun creeping up the sky. I paced the deck, checking my watch, willing help to arrive. My boat rocked softly, the waves lapping at its sides, but my mind was anything but calm. Every cry she made pushed me to act, but I had to wait. I couldn't free her alone. Those rocks were too big, her body too heavy. I needed hands, tools, a plan. So I watched her, helpless for now, muttering under my breath. "Hold on, girl, we're coming." Finally, I heard engines in the distance. Relief washed over me as Liam and Noah's boat rounded the bend, cutting through the water with purpose. They pulled up alongside, their faces tight with focus as they took in the sight. Liam's sandy hair stuck to his forehead, already damp with spray, and Noah's dark eyes narrowed as he assessed the rocks. "She's in deep," Liam said, voice low. Noah nodded, tossing a rope to tie our boats together. "How long's she been here?" he asked. "No idea," I admitted. "Long enough?" The Coast Guard radioed back then, their instructions sharp and clear. Keep her wet and cool until high tide. It sounded simple, until they added the kicker. "Tide's not up for another 8 hours, the voice crackled. 8 hours! My heart sank like a stone. 8 hours in the sun, pinned against those rocks, could kill her. Liam cursed under his breath, and Noah rubbed his jaw, thinking fast. "We've got work to do," I said, shoving my doubts aside. We couldn't wait for the tide to save her. We had to keep her alive until it did. We sprang into action. Liam hauled a pump from my boat's storage, a clunky old thing we'd use for emergencies. "This'll do," he said, rigging it to spray seawater. I grabbed the hose, aiming a steady stream over her body while Noah tested the flow. It sputtered at first, then settled into a rhythm, misting her skin with cool water. It wasn't perfect. The spray was uneven, and we'd have to refill the tank. But it was a start. "Sheets," I called, remembering a trick from training. "We need to cover her. Keep the sun off." Noah darted below deck, emerging with an armful of old tarps and blankets. We soaked them in the ocean, the salt water dripping cold and heavy, then climbed onto the rocks to drape them over her. She flinched at first, her body jerking as we approached. Her tail splashed weakly, sending up a spray that soaked my boots. "Easy, girl," I said, keeping my voice low and soft. "We're here to help." I reached out, careful not to startle her, and laid a wet sheet over her back. She trembled under my touch, her skin warm despite the water. Liam worked beside me, spreading another sheet over her head, mindful of her blowhole. Noah climbed higher, covering her dorsal fin. Up close, she was enormous, muscles rippling beneath her hide, power trapped in a cage of stone. At first, she fought us, her fear plain as day. But as we kept moving, kept talking, something shifted. Her big eye tracked us, dark and deep, and her trembling eased. "She's calming down," Noah said, surprised. I nodded, catching her gaze. "She knows we're trying." It was a hunch, but it felt right. Orcas are smart, smarter than most people realize. I'd read studies about their problem solving, their memory, their bonds. Maybe she could sense we weren't a threat. The morning stretched on, slow and relentless. We fell into a pattern: pump water, swap sheets, check her breathing. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last wisps of morning haze. Sweat beaded on my forehead, stinging my eyes, and my shirt clung to me, soaked with seawater and effort. My arms ached from hauling buckets to refill the pump, my legs cramped from scrambling over the rocks. But I didn't stop. None of us did. Her pod's calls rang out every so often, faint but steady, and each time she'd lift her head a little, answering back. It was like they were cheering her on, and us too. I found myself talking to her more as the hours wore on. "You're doing great," I'd say, splashing water over her side. "Just hang in there." My voice was hoarse, but it seemed to help. Her blowhole puffed slower, steadier when I spoke. Liam picked up the habit too, muttering encouragements as he worked. "Tough girl," he'd say, grinning despite the strain. Noah hummed tunes, off-key, but it didn't matter. We were a team, human and Orca, fighting the clock together. The sun turned brutal as noon approached, the rocks around us radiating heat like an oven. The sheets dried fast now, forcing us to soak them more often. My hands pruned from the constant wet, my muscles screaming with every lift. But her eyes kept me going, those dark, knowing eyes that seemed to say, "I'm still here." She was a marvel, a living reminder of why I'd chosen this life, not just to study, but to protect. Fishermen started showing up, their boats dotting the water. They'd heard the chatter on the radio, seen the smoke signals of our struggle. One dropped off extra sheets, another brought drinking water for us. "Keep it up, lads," an old captain called. his voice rough with salt. It felt good, knowing we weren't alone. Word was spreading. Our stranded orca was becoming a story, a cause. Then the pump broke. A grinding screech cut the air, and the water stopped. My heart lurched as the hose went limp in my hands. "No, no, no," I muttered, dropping to my knees beside it. Liam rushed over, tools in hand, but it was no use. 8 hours of strain had killed it. Panic flared hot in my chest, but I shoved it down. "Buckets," I said, voice tight. "We'll do it by hand." Noah nodded, already grabbing containers. We formed a chain, scooping seawater and passing it along, pouring it over her as fast as we could. It wasn't enough, not like the pump, but it was something. The tide finally started creeping in, its slow crawl a tease against the rocks that held her captive. I stood knee-deep in the shallows, a bucket dangling from my tired hands, watching the water lap higher with every wave. It wasn't fast enough, not yet. The young orca's skin glistened under the patchwork of damp sheets we'd draped over her. But without the pump, keeping her wet was a losing battle. My arms trembled as I scooped another load of seawater, the cold splash barely making a dent against the drying patches on her side. 8 hours of this, 8 grueling hours, and now it felt like we were teetering on the edge of failure. Her breathing had grown heavier, each puff from her blowhole a labored rasp that cut through the quiet. I could see the strain in her body, the way her massive frame sagged against the rocks. She'd been out of the water too long, her own weight pressing down on her organs, squeezing the life out of her, bit by bit. "Hang on," I murmured, tipping the bucket carefully near her head, avoiding her blowhole. The water ran in rivulets over her black and white hide, and her eye flicked toward me, dark, deep, and flickering with something I hoped was fight. "Your family's out there, girl. They're waiting." Liam sloshed through the shallows beside me, his bucket sloshing as he poured. His face was red from the sun, his shirt plastered to his chest with sweat and seawater. "She's tougher than us," he said, voice rough but steady. I nodded, managing a faint smile. She was tough, tougher than I'd ever imagined, but toughness alone might not be enough. Noah was up on the rocks, peeling back the driest sheets and dunking them in the rising tide. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was rationing every ounce of energy he had left. We were all running on fumes, our bodies screaming for rest, but none of us would give up. Not now. The rescue team, a handful of Coast Guard folks who had arrived an hour back, worked with us, their boots crunching on the rocky shore. They'd brought extra hands and a calm authority that steadied our fraying nerves. "We need to clear her path," one of them called, a wiry guy named Carter with salt and pepper hair. He gestured at the sheets still clinging to her. "When the water's high enough, she's got to move on her own." I nodded, helping Noah tug the heavy fabric free. It felt wrong to step back after so long at her side, like abandoning a friend. But we had to trust her now, trust the tide, trust her strength. As we pulled the last sheet away, she went still. Her tail gave a weak flick, barely stirring the water, then nothing. The silence hit me like a fist to the chest. No cries, no splashes, just the soft lapping of waves and the distant hum of her pod's calls. My heart froze, a cold dread sinking in. Had we lost her? After all this, the sweat, the aching muscles, the endless buckets, had it been for nothing? I glanced at Liam and Noah, their faces mirroring my fear. Liam's jaw tightened, and Noah's hands clenched into fists at his sides. We'd poured everything into this, and now she lay there, motionless, a dark shape against the gray rocks. I held my breath, watching her blowhole for any sign. The water was rising faster now, swirling around her lower half, lifting her slightly. It wasn't deep enough yet, not quite, but it was close. "Come on," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the waves. "You've got this." Her eye was still open, fixed on the horizon where her pod's whistles drifted in, faint but persistent. They hadn't left her. They were out there, calling her home. I clung to that, letting it anchor me against the panic clawing at my gut. Time stretched thin, each second dragging like an hour. The tide inched up, covering her tail, then her belly. I could see her muscles twitch, subtle at first, like she was testing the water's pull. My pulse quickened. "She's moving," Noah said, his voice low and hopeful. I nodded, not daring to look away. Her tail shifted again, stronger this time, stirring the shallows into little eddies. She was gathering herself, feeling for that moment when the water would hold her up. I stepped back, giving her space, my boots sinking into the wet sand. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the bay. The air cooled slightly, a relief after the day's brutal heat, but I barely noticed. Every nerve in me was tuned to her, to the way her body tensed, the way her fins flexed against the rising tide. The rescue team fanned out, forming a loose semicircle behind her, ready to guide if she needed it. But this was her fight now. We'd done all we could. "You're almost there," I said, my throat tight. "Just a little more." Then it happened. With a surge that seemed to come from nowhere, she thrust her tail down, once, twice, and exploded forward. Water sprayed everywhere, a cold shock against my face as her massive body slid free of the rocks. She cut through the shallows, her dorsal fins slicing the surface, and plunged into deeper water. A roar erupted from us, raw, ragged cheers that echoed across the bay. Liam was shouting, fists pumping the air. Noah let out a whoop, swiping at his eyes with a soaked sleeve. I just stood there, grinning like an idiot, relief flooding me so hard my knees nearly buckled. She was free. After 8 hours of hell, she was free. Her sleek form moved through the waves, graceful and powerful, like she'd never been trapped at all. I watched her go, tears mixing with the seawater on my cheeks. I didn't care who saw. Some moments deserve that kind of raw feeling, and this was one of them. The fishermen who'd lingered nearby honked their horns, their boats bobbing in the distance. Even the Coast Guard crew clapped, their stern faces breaking into smiles. But I couldn't let it end there. I stumbled to my boat, legs shaky with exhaustion, and grabbed the hydrophone from our gear. My hands fumbled as I lowered it into the water, the cord slipping through my pruned fingers. We'd heard her pod all day, those distant mournful calls that had kept us going. I needed to know they'd find her. I hit play, her recorded cries spilling out through the speaker, sharp and clear across the waves. For a moment, it was just her voice, echoing alone. My breath caught, waiting. Then it came, faint at first, a whisper of sound beneath the surface. Whistles, clicks, a chorus growing louder. Her pod was answering. They were close, closer than I dared hope. I turned to Liam and Noah, their tired faces lighting up as the calls rang out. She heard them too. Her path shifted, her fin cutting a new arc through the water as she swam toward the sound. I tracked her as long as I could until her black shape blurred into the deepening blue, her dorsal fin dipping beneath the waves. We stood there, the three of us, soaked to the bone and spent beyond words. The bay settled around us, the tide smoothing over the rocks like nothing had happened. But something had, a miracle we'd fought for together. My legs gave out then, and I sank onto the sand, letting the exhaustion hit. Liam dropped beside me, breathing hard, while Noah leaned against the boat, staring out where she'd gone. We didn't need to say much. The quiet said it all. A few days later, a message crackled over the radio that made my heart leap again. A whale watching group had spotted a new calf with one of the local pods. The timing, the markings, it lined up. Experts thought it was her, our Orca. Not just alive, but thriving. We'd given her more than a chance to swim away. We'd given her a future. We named her Dawn for that morning when we'd pulled her back from the edge. It fit. The start of something new, a light breaking through after the dark. I think about her sometimes when I'm out on the water. The ocean's vast and the pods move like shadows, but I scan for her anyway. That tall dorsal fin, those white patches. I'd know her if I saw her. Maybe she's out there now, teaching her calf the currents, the songs, the ways of their world. I may never spot her again, but that's okay. What matters is, she's free, swimming with her family, alive because we didn't give up. That day carved something into me, something about hope, about pushing past the breaking point, about the thin, strong thread that ties us to these creatures. I became a marine researcher to learn about them, but Dawn taught me more. She showed me why I stay. Why I fight. It's not just science, it's standing up for them when they can't, being their voice when the rocks close in. Every time I tell her story, I feel it again. That spark of purpose, that reminder that even the longest odds can turn if you hold on tight enough. Thank you for watching. If you like the story, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.